Hello and a very warm welcome to the Big Bright podcast. A subject that we've been discussing a lot recently is creativity and how to keep creative when perhaps you're feeling the strain of not being around others to bounce ideas around in person. We've worked with many creatives over the years at Bright, and one who really stands out is Tom Leach, creative director and founder of Evoke, a creative agency based in Brighton. Tom worked closely with us to evolve our existing brand into one that authentically represents our personality and culture. We're welcoming him back today to chat all things creative and discover how he keeps the ideas flowing. So welcome, Tom. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so to start off with, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you came to be director of your own creative agency?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked in London for sort of over 16 years, and I feel really proud that I spent a lot of that time in some great design agencies, worked with a lot of super people on some lovely projects for businesses of all shapes and sizes, actually, and flavours, and all over the world as well. So it's been really exciting for me, and you know, I feel quite privileged that I'm doing sort of what I love and what I went to university for and all those things.
What did you study at university?
I didn't actually study graphic design specifically. I did an art foundation course, which is quite common in creative industry. You do that for a year before you go into university. And I did that to sort of help guide myself, really, because you get to explore all different types of media, design, creative. At school, I always loved to draw and paint, to make things with my hands, all those sorts of things. And Art Foundation sort of led me to a point where actually I quite liked the world of 2D and 3D design, which was weird because it meant I'm not a product designer or destined for just sort of graphics necessarily.
I think a lot of people don't actually go on to do what they studied at university. I think it's actually quite rare to find someone that did, maybe. So I don't think you're, a strange breed.
That's very kind of you to say. I personally quite like paths that aren't necessarily straight. I think you learn a lot from taking those little turns in life and exploring different avenues. And if nothing else, you find out that you chose the right one because the other one you tried out maybe wasn't for you. So you feel good about moving forward. But I actually did packaging design as a degree.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it sort of feels even still quite niche to talk about that. In a way, a long story short, what I loved about that was actually learning about the brands behind the products and the packaging, more so than the packaging itself, because that changed quite a lot. And the brands felt more important. They always had a mission and, values behind them and a bit of an ambition, hopefully. Some of them stood for something and some of them inspired me. So I thought, that's really what I want to get into. I want to get into the brands behind all these things and take things from there.
Can you tell us about any of the brands that maybe stood out for you when you were developing the packaging?
We had various briefs that were set at university that were quite self-initiated. So you often would come up with your own brand. One of those that I came up with was this idea of a car sharing brand that sort of took the pressure off the commute for Londoners and the like. And it also made use of locations of sort of old buildings that were no longer in use. So it create these sort of local carpools where you'd rock up early in the morning, you might grab a car if you needed to commute somewhere or swap your car, and you use their electric vehicles. They'd also give you breakfast and lunch as part of that, so you're kind of all set for the day. I solved loads of problems in that make-believe.
You did.
project.
I mean, every problem you faced was solved.
Yeah, it's quite good because I sort of found myself wanting to do these kind of, the bigger the problem and the bigger solution, the more it kind of excited me. So I was quite driven by problem solving, I think, which realistically, you can't always set out to solve the world's problems in every project, but occasionally you might get the opportunity to do some good. But also generally from a practical everyday commercial needs, businesses have problems to solve, and that's all about what I do with brands, helping brands with their challenges or become stronger and better. So it all sort of started there, just looking at what's the challenge, what's the issue behind where people want to go.
I love that. And I think that kind of segues us nicely into the sort of topic of the rebranding of Bright. You obviously work really closely with Vic and the team about how to basically take Bright to the next level of their rebranding process. So how do you approach a project like that when it's already, it started, maybe it's got some of the bare bones, but they just want to take it further? I mean, what are the first steps?
It's really simple, actually, how I start this, and it's probably quite obvious. So I'll just state that obvious, which is...
Well, it might not be obvious because I don't think everybody listening might be in that sort of creative brain. So feel free to layman's terms.
No, that's cool. No, it's that's the only way I speak, really, is layman's. It's quite good just so I can understand myself. The first step really is to meet with the client and talk about their business and their challenges. Set aside a nice bit of time for that and go through everything. And everyone's different, every project's different, every business is different. So they might like to start with the brief right out in front of them, or they might not have a brief at all, and you help them get to one that works. So I think through that discussion, you start building a relationship, you start building trust, you volunteer directions, opportunities of where things could go, recommendations. And I think along the way, you challenge and question, in the ambition of discovering things that could be, hidden or could be elevated or moved around, ultimately valuable things.
Because quite often, I guess some people don't quite know what they want, perhaps, or they just want somebody who's done this before and is professional to guide them. So I think a lot of people might go into that process being like, it's not quite right, but we're not quite sure what we need to do. So is that quite hard to sometimes kind of translate almost what someone's asking when they don't really know themselves?
I don't think it's hard because, like you say, I think it's quite it can be quite a common thing, and that's absolutely no problem at all, because I don't expect anyone to sort of be perfect or anything to be perfect, and it probably shouldn't. And I think it's part of my job is to help my clients really in any way with what they need, and part of that could just be helping them with the brief. And I think actually sometimes it can work out better because I'm there at a much earlier stage helping shape that point, shape what their challenge is with them, and that leads to a better answer, I think.
So I think, like, from projects that I've worked on before, I kind of found that if the designer and the client's viewpoints are aligned at the beginning, it makes the project a lot easier. So if you can you give the audience any tips for briefing a designer, and basically, I suppose more importantly, what to avoid doing, and what to do to make sure that you're both on the same page right from the beginning? Yeah,
absolutely. I think the most important thing above all is just to simply be clear. And I think there's a couple of different ways. I think there's how I might brief a designer and how a client might brief a designer. And if we're talking about a written brief, then I think the challenge there is to challenge yourself to be concise, because what that does is demonstrate how well you yourself understand your own project. And a good way to test that out is to try and fit that whole brief onto one page. And if you can do that and it feels good, then you're on the right track. And I think if it doesn't feel 100% clear, then it's always best to go back and work out why that is. Is it your knowledge of it? Is it someone that's handed it down to you and not really explained something?
That's interesting, because I think that a lot of people will try and pack it with detail. So you're saying actually kind of maybe less detail, but just be more concise. And so what should be on that page? Say you were kind of approaching a rebrand, what would you say is that really key to have on that page for you?
If it's a rebrand, obviously there will be a lot more questions and answers beyond the page of the brief. But the best bits there are, firstly, let's make the assumption the person reading this brief doesn't really know much about the background. So a very quick intro, that who the company is, what their challenge is, and this possibly isn't in the right order, but things like, how much time do we have? What's the deadline here? Who are we talking to? What's the audience? Is it internal? Is it external? Is it both? Should I know that if it's an external audience, is there a certain type of audience within there, a certain age group or what have you? So things like that all shape how we need to communicate, I think. And so I've always quite liked this saying is having the freedom of a tight brief is quite nice, because weirdly it feels like creativity should be better if it's more open, but it's not always the case, interestingly. And I think knowing what the challenge is helps you really pinpoint more meaningful answers.
I like that. That's a good quote. And have you had many instances where, you feel like you've got down the line a bit and, maybe a client has strayed from the brief and that causes issues? Like, how do you pull it back from there? Do you just have to revisit that brief, or how do you safeguard that?
I think a good brief is something that you can always return to and measure against the objectives that were set out. So I think, in the example of sharing your first round of creative, let's say, where you're demonstrating how you're solving these challenges, how you're measuring those ideas, I think if there's any discussion that feels like it's, I don't know if it's going to get out of control or it needs measuring, then I think that's what the brief does. You go back to the brief, and it helps keep people on track a little bit. And I think what's also important is to share the brief with everyone who's going to have a point of view on this. So stakeholders, in other words. And it's good to tell the designer or studio or agency, whoever they might be, who those stakeholders are, because everyone needs to be on the same page, and those stakeholders need to know what the brief is. Otherwise, they'll come at it going, well, I thought we could do that, or I thought we were going to do a book rather than a website or something. That does create a bit of a rebrief situation, which if you're not careful, means you have to start again. But I think doing that little bit up front saves everyone a lot of time and complexity.
Definitely. And I've been in a situation before which was really difficult when I was at an old job, and we'd worked so hard on a website with a designer and everybody was so pleased with it. And then the CEO walked in one day, and this was at the point where we were almost in development, and he just announced, no, I don't like that colour, or and I was like, oh my God, we've spoken about this for months. And it was so frustrating. And then obviously the designer got frustrated because that was not the time to be talking about colours. And, it was just a mess. And it was because he hadn't been involved right from the beginning. And if he had have done, he would have been able to have his say then. So I can imagine that would be incredibly frustrating. And I think that's why I always think I don't know if I could do something like that in that role, because I couldn't handle someone coming in and being so kind of subjective about it. But yeah, it's a tough thing to manage, I guess.
It can be, and I think sometimes that can be quite satisfying, because I like to think everything's got a solution. So if you end up in a sticky position, it's lovely to help everyone get through that, no matter what it is, and then you feel good, and everyone feels like they've moved forward. I think it's interesting what you say about the subjectivity element, because that's a forever challenge, really. But in a way, it doesn't need to be if you structure things in the right way. And I try incredibly hard to make things more objective than subjective. So that means when I'm coming back with my ideas, my thinking, my recommendations, I've got a strong rationale for why I've done that. Even down to something very simple like colour or typography or type of message. There's always a reason why that connects to the brand, or why that's right for what we're doing. Or the colour could be as simple as it's one that stands out that's just not like your competitors who are all doing the same thing. And I think you'll be noticed because of this. And also it's a warm colour, which feels positive. I don't know. These are just things off the top of my head, off the cuff. But
it perhaps comes down to the trust as well between the client and the designer. I mean, they need to have trust that you have had all that thought process, because at the end of the day, they've employed you to do that thinking and to have that knowledge of what works. So I guess some part of it, they have to let go a little bit and allow you to do that part of your job.
Trust is really important. So that's where you kind of, always want to make sure that you're offering up these solutions and sharing your thinking and helping. To some people, they might be a bit hesitant to challenge, but that sounds like quite a big, strong word. But, if you don't think the brief's quite right, there's a way to make it better, then it's great to share that, because that's the value you're offering your client. They're paying you to help push their business, to help better everything. So to be in a position of trust and demonstrate your intelligence, that's great. That helps everyone, I think.
Yeah, I think that challenging actually always seems to go down well, because it shows A, that you care enough to challenge it, and B, that you have the knowledge and the education and the experience to challenge it if you don't think it's right. So I think it actually makes people feel more secure going forward, in my experience anyway. So are there any brands outside of Bright, of course, that you admire and would love to get your hands on?
The answer is there are many. And I think it's something that's shifted with experience as well. I think back in the day, year one, it's all the sort of flashy names that you want to get your hands on, and whatever that might be that you're into at the time. And, I guess there's a lot of people would say at that point, Nike or something like that or whatnot. And I think those sorts of brands can be super attractive. I've worked with, like I said, a lot of brands of different shapes and sizes. And I think there's an interesting sort of world behind the scenes as well. And I think with the world sort of constantly moving and shifting, my interest has changed to things that, for me, create a new challenge or challenge me, or even just a type of business rather than a brand name. So I love challenges. Everyone's different. And for example, startups, they can be super exciting because they're so new, and the people behind them are so enthusiastic, and they've got this real ambition to make this work. Business is possibly harder than ever. If they've got a good idea and they've had to work hard at that idea to, make it a feasible one in a crowded marketplace in many areas, then it's a lovely thing to get on board with, share their passion and share that ambition and work with them to get their business into reality and see people buy it and interact with it. And that's great.
Yeah, I guess that's really exciting to be, involved right at the beginning and to be really part of how that brand looks and feels and, comes across. I think I can definitely see why that would appeal more than maybe a more established brand.
I love those as well. I think it's what's quite nice is having a bit of a varied diet. So, I love the established brands because they are just that. They've got an audience, they've got a business, and things are successful. And you want to help build on that story and move into the future. And their next ambition might be, now I want to be the best in the UK. So everyone's got an ambition to go to, and I love that drive. The interesting thing about startups now more than ever is that they can come out of nowhere and take over the world in a few years. And that's quite a bonkers thing to get your head around, how that's managed and how that's pulled off. It starts with a great idea, and that's what I love about it.
Are there any projects, or is there a specific project that you've worked on that you felt really pushed your creative boundaries?
I worked on this brand campaign for Vodafone, where I led the creation of this campaign, and it was going to appear on London taxis. So it was the biggest campaign of its kind in the UK. And the idea that I came up with involved a typographic map of London. So that covered the entire taxi. So there's 2,000 street names which had to be typeset in a particular typeface, and all from scratch as well. So I didn't have a purchased map I could quickly just stick on there. It was rearranging these things to suit the design that me and the team had in our head, making sure everything's geographically correct as well, because someone's going to pick you up on something that's not quite right.
Be honest, did you start that and feel like, what have I got myself into?
Yes, definitely. Immediately, yeah. As soon as the client went, that one, we have to have that one. Oh, are you sure? It did involve actually coming in at the weekend, staying quite late, because I became quite obsessive about making sure it was exactly right, and
I bet you've got a really good knowledge of London now.
Oh, God, I can't get it out of my brain. I'll close my eyes. It's still there. I'm glad that it went well because, this thing was on about 1,000 taxis. It was on for a year. So if there are any spelling mistakes, that would have been pretty haunting, I think. And each taxi cab took 6 hours to wrap, so times 1,000, that's quite a lot. And thankfully, I didn't have to do the vinyl wrapping.
Oh, gosh. That's fascinating, though. I love the idea of it.
It's quite funny. And I got to drive one of the cabs, which was a nice highlight. And, those are the funny little quirks that pop up every now and again, working with different companies, different industries. I get to experience these sort of weird things. And another thing that popped up was the cab was used in a TV ad for Vodafone, and it featured Yoda in the back seat. He was using the phone chargers that were part of the idea that were installed in the cabs to charge his lightsaber. Yeah, couldn't have been more proud at that point.
Amazing. Well, we'll have to share a picture of the cab in the blog post when we publish this podcast. I think everyone's going to be desperate to see it now, aren't they?
Yeah, that's great. And another project took me to Nigeria, which was quite an interesting experience as well. And that was possibly a place that I may not have chosen to go on holiday. So it was through work that I was able to experience that sort of thing. And yeah, I stayed there for sort of about 8 days, getting involved in the brand there and flying to the capital as well, and seeing the difference between the sort of quite busy city and a sort of calmer setting as well in Nigeria. And it's soaking up everything, popping out to restaurants, going for drinks with the client and that sort of thing, and really getting inside it all. And I remember one morning it was quite surreal where we were flying to the capital. We were driving to the airport, but we had police escort for some reason, I think possibly to look after the client. So we were zooming along the motorway with blue lights at 5 a.m. And I was like, I thought it was a dream. It's so weird.
It does sound crazy. Not your average day in the office. Right?
No, definitely not. So I think that's what's fun about the experience, is it builds you. You collect all these little things, and you see lots of things that actually, sometimes a lot later down the line they pop up and they become really useful. Very exciting.
That's amazing. I love it. And so, where do you get your inspiration from? As an extension of that, I mean, you obviously do pick up a lot of things along the way in your experience, in your work, but are there any online resources that you could recommend to other designers that really help to spark inspiration for you?
Yeah, I think what's great is that there's so many now. I think I always sort of think back to, again, that sort of day one where there might have been like one good website that you looked at. But, you know, in this short space of time, it's really ramped up. And you've got everything from big companies, you know, saying what they think's cool to people on their own leading the way as well. And, you know, before I sort of name a few online things, I quite like, shame about the lockdown, of course, because you know, possibly less outdoors than you were, but you know, I'd get a lot of inspiration just from walking around and being outside, and especially in Brighton, there's lots of lovely things to see. And, you know, a little walk through the lanes you can discover new things every day. And, you know, chatting with people, so peers or friends that I know, is great. What are they up to? You know, because they might be working on something behind the scenes that sounds amazing. You might not see for a while, or you may never see, because that's the sort of reality of some things. Things I see on TV as well. I find Brighton Glug Talks are a great source of inspiration too, and they're always quite a fun event. You know, you get to sort of relax, a bit of a beer, and enjoy hearing someone new you might not know, or you might always wanted to have heard and know more about what they do. And you can catch up with industry peers and friends at those too. So website-wise, online-wise, I think, you know, there's a few classic ones. You know, It's Nice That, Identity Designed, Brand New by Under Consideration. And I think also you might choose to know more about things more specific to what you specialise in, or you might like to just go a bit broader. And I think following people and companies on, you know, their social channels is a pretty good way to stay up to date.
I was going to ask if you are on Instagram and do you follow people on that? Is that helpful to you? Or
Absolutely, yeah, I think it is. And what's nice is you can stay in touch with your clients better as well on those, but also gain inspiration from other companies you follow and people as well. You know, there's so many people, talented people out there, whether they're animators, illustrators, clothing designers, interior designers. I love all aspects of design, and sometimes it's just as inspiring to see a fantastic new interior space as it might be to see a great new brand for something that's really disruptive. And so it always sort of feels like good brain food.
So you touched upon lockdown, and although I think everyone's got lockdown fatigue, we don't even want to talk about it anymore, but we've been talking quite a lot just amongst friends and colleagues. Is there a feeling of maybe losing a bit of creativity during this time? Because like you said, we can't get out so much and not so much maybe is happening. You know, how has that affected you? Have you felt more or less creative, or, you know, what's the difference?
Well, the big difference is really not being able to sort of meet your clients face to face. It's just different. You know, we've all quickly adapted, and I think everyone's done a super job jumping onto all the long list of video sharing things, and each one every day seems to be a different one, with everyone going, oh, I just got to reset my computer. Hang on, can you hear me? I don't think those channels were quite ready for us to all jump on at once. But I think you don't have to always meet people face to face, but, you know, it's good, like I said, with all things, to have a nice bit of variety, and popping into an office, you know, the little walk to and from, and just like seeing your client is all a lovely thing, and you can gain a lot from that. So I think that's a challenge. You've got a bit of distance there. I think in terms of creativity, you know, again, you're still working on the same briefs, same projects. Perhaps the channels change to suit the time. You've always got the brief and your client there to help push creativity as well. You've got yourself to push creativity, and sometimes you might need to just, well, if you're on your own and you're used to a bit more directional steer, then it's not easy. Just trying to find a way to be your own creative director, so to be able to give yourself a bit of perspective and step back from what you're doing for a moment, just to see the bigger picture. So I think, you know, it's very easy to be really, really hard on yourself when you're in isolation, and actually what you're doing is probably pretty good, and it's probably the answer, but you're just, you know, you haven't got the other people around you to kind of go, yeah, that's brilliant, let's do that.
Yeah, the validation is missing, isn't it, sometimes?
I think so. So, and again, this is something that can come with experience. I think it's possibly harder when you're a bit newer to the industry, because you haven't necessarily worked up to the role of creative director. And I think if you've had a chance to do that, you already know what being a creative director is like, and you know what to look out for. You know when you're starting to slow down, or something might dry up a little bit. The key to solving that problem is to notice it as quickly as possible, recognize it, because then you can work to fixing it. And I think with decent experience, you can clock that quite quickly. And solving it can be as simple as just get away from the computer, or whatever you're doing, the brainstorm, or just go for a walk, have a cup of tea, depending on how much time you have.
Have a cup of tea. That is the most British answer to anything. isn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
No creativity, have a cup of tea.
So, sometimes 10 in a row is quite useful as well, depending on...
Definitely get the brain working a little bit faster.
Yeah, but it can be a simple thing that has a big impact. And I think it's sometimes the danger is that you find yourself in a hard situation, the pressure builds up and you push even harder. And that's a good way to sort of break something, really. And I think it's easy to say that because people might go, well, I've got to solve it. I've only got an hour. Take 5 minutes of that hour. It's going to be worth it. Because if you spend another hour going in the wrong direction, you are in trouble.
Absolutely. And I feel like that's a good kind of message to finish on, really, because it's, with anything, and especially creativity, it doesn't always work to plan and it doesn't work under pressure. So taking a bit of time out, especially at the moment when there is so much pressure, can really be the key. Thank you so much, Tom. That was absolutely fascinating to get inside your creative brain. It sounds like there's lots going on, and what's really nice is that you're so enthused by it, and actually that makes me feel really enthused.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic to hear. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And so for everybody listening that might want to see some of your work or get in contact with you, can you let them know how to find you?
The first port of call, I think, would be my website, which is studioevoke.co.uk, all one word. But I've also got my social channels. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So that's at studio_evoke. And there's a few ways to see, or drop me an email. I'm tom@studioevoke.co.uk. I'll be happy to chat over the phone too. So always here.
Awesome. Yeah. So we'll link everything there. So thank you so much, Tom, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Pleasure. You too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please remember to subscribe to ensure you never miss an episode. You can find out more top tips from the Bright team on our website at bright-interactive.co.uk.